Theresa Caputo built a career helping others heal, delivering comfort, closure, and hope to grieving families. But behind the blonde hair and confident presence is a woman who absorbed sorrow for decades, often at her own expense. At 58, Theresa's tragedy isn't about belief or doubt. It's about what happens when you spend a lifetime carrying other people's pain while quietly losing pieces of your own. From the outside, Theresa Caputo appeared empowered, certain, expressive, and emotionally fearless. Her role placed her at the center of grief, day after day, translating loss into reassurance for strangers. What the cameras rarely showed was the cost of that constant emotional exposure. Absorbing sorrow isn't neutral. It accumulates. Early on, Theresa learned to prioritize others' healing over her own boundaries. Each reading required openness, vulnerability, and emotional labor that didn't disappear when the session ended. The line between personal life and public calling blurred until there was barely a line at all. Pain followed her home. Silence became the only place to process it. Over time, that imbalance reshaped her relationships and sense of self. Being needed constantly left little room to simply be human. Strength became expectation. Availability became obligation. At 58, the tragedy isn't skepticism or fame. It's the quiet erosion that comes from giving endlessly without being allowed to rest. What happens to someone who spends their life healing others but never stops to heal themselves? As Theresa Caputo's visibility grew, so did the expectations placed upon her. What began as a personal calling slowly transformed into a public obligation. People didn't just seek guidance. They depended on it. Every appearance carried the weight of someone else's grief, someone else's unanswered questions. Saying no longer felt possible. This shift changed how she experienced her own life. Emotional boundaries dissolved. Moments meant for rest became extensions of her work. Even joy felt interrupted by responsibility. The world saw confidence, but behind it was fatigue, deep emotional exhaustion that had nowhere to go. The tragedy here isn't belief or disbelief. It's saturation. When a person becomes a vessel for others' pain, there is little space left for their own. Theresa didn't abandon her gift, but the gift began to demand more than it gave back. When purpose consumes every part of your life, how do you reclaim space to simply exist? As Theresa Caputo's role expanded, so did public scrutiny. Her work invited belief, doubt, devotion, and criticism all at once. Carrying that intensity day after day took a toll few acknowledged. Being constantly questioned didn't just challenge her credibility, it challenged her sense of peace. Every appearance became a defense, every silence an interpretation. This pressure followed her into her personal life. Relationships strained under the weight of public expectation and private exhaustion. When your identity becomes inseparable from your work, disagreements feel personal, not professional. Theresa was expected to be certain at all times, even when her own life felt uncertain. The tragedy in this chapter isn't controversy, it's vulnerability without refuge. There was no neutral ground where she could simply exist without explanation. Faith, once grounding, became something she had to constantly uphold rather than draw strength from. What happens when the thing that gives your life meaning also leaves you with nowhere to hide? While millions watched Theresa Caputo help others find closure, her own personal foundation was slowly fracturing. Years of emotional labor, constant travel, and public scrutiny placed strain on the one place meant to offer refuge: her marriage. What once felt supportive began to feel distant, shaped by schedules that rarely aligned and emotional reserves that were already depleted. Being emotionally available to strangers left little energy for intimacy at home. Conversations became practical. Silence grew familiar. The work that defined her identity slowly widened the gap between who she was publicly and who she could be privately. Neither side was wrong, just exhausted. The tragedy here isn't blame, it's erosion. Love doesn't always end with conflict. Sometimes it fades under the weight of unmet emotional needs. When the marriage eventually ended, it wasn't shocking. It was inevitable. A quiet loss, after years of quiet strain. How many relationships weaken not from betrayal, but from emotional exhaustion left unspoken? After the marriage ended, silence settled in differently for Theresa Caputo. For years, her life had been filled with voices, grief, questions, emotions that demanded answers. Suddenly, there was space, and in that space came an unfamiliar feeling: loneliness without an audience. Being strong for others had never prepared her for being alone with herself. Publicly, she remained composed. Privately, the absence was heavy. The role of comforter doesn't leave room to ask for comfort in return. Friends expected resilience. Fans expected certainty. Few recognized that she was navigating loss without the same permission to grieve she offered others so freely. This chapter reveals a painful imbalance. Theresa had spent years reminding people they weren't alone. Yet, when her own life shifted, solitude arrived quietly and completely. The tragedy isn't isolation itself, but realizing how rarely caretakers are cared for. Who supports the healer when the healing role finally falls away? As Theresa Caputo moved forward alone, a deeper challenge emerged, figuring out who she was without the roles that once defined her. Wife, caretaker, medium for millions. When those layers began to fall away, she faced an unfamiliar silence that no reading could interpret. Identity, once reinforced by purpose, suddenly felt fragile. She had spent decades being needed. When that need softened, it left questions behind. Was she valued for who she was, or only for what she provided? Stepping back from constant emotional labor forced her to confront exhaustion she had long ignored. Healing, she realized, isn't only about helping others move on. It's about allowing yourself to rest without guilt. This chapter isn't about rebuilding fame. It's about rebuilding self. Learning to exist without constant responsibility. Learning that worth doesn't disappear when availability ends. At 58, the tragedy isn't loss alone. It's how long it took to give herself permission to simply be human. If we stop being everything for everyone else, can we finally discover who we are for ourselves? At 58, Theresa Caputo stands at a crossroads defined not by belief, but by boundaries. After years of emotional sacrifice, she began to choose survival, protecting her energy, her time, and her inner life. This wasn't withdrawal. It was correction. A recognition that empathy without limits becomes self-erasure. She didn't abandon her purpose. She reshaped it. Learning when to step back became as important as knowing when to step forward. For the first time, she allowed herself to be unfinished, uncertain, and imperfect, qualities she once only acknowledged in others. Theresa's tragedy isn't that she gave too much. It's that giving too much was once mistaken for strength. Her resilience now lies in preservation, not depletion. And sometimes, choosing yourself after a lifetime of giving feels like the bravest act of all. When self-care replaces self-sacrifice, is that the end of a calling or its truest evolution? Theresa Caputo's story reveals the hidden cost of carrying others' pain for a lifetime. Behind the confidence was a woman slowly losing herself to service. At 58, her tragedy isn't belief or fame. It's learning that healing others means nothing if you don't protect your own soul. Stay with us for more untold human stories.